All right. So this session is kind of interesting. I sort of like it to be interactive if possible. It's something that was delivered, a form of this was delivered at the Ignite conference by a bunch of marketing people, which is great. And part of the goal of this is to help you understand all the different offerings that exist in Azure, mostly from a PaaS perspective, so platform as a service, and kind of how you should think about them in relation to each other. But the deck is kind of just like, here's one, here's another, here's another, here's another. So what I want to get to ultimately, and like I said, I'd like it to be kind of fluid and interactive if we can, is sort of just have conversations about the types of applications that you're building, depending on the level of familiarity with various offerings in Azure that are in the deck. We can go into some level of detail. But part of my day job at the moment, back at the ranch, is trying to figure out how to make all this stuff a little bit clearer to people. Because what ends up happening, I mean, just to kind of pull the curtain back a little bit, at Microsoft is a large company. Even Azure itself is a large organization. And you've got a bunch of different teams that are building products that are kind of, in some cases, overlapping with each other. And when they go out and talk to customers and they want to give them sort of the elevator pitch, you're talking about platform as a service and building applications, typically the pitch is something like, do you want to build highly reliable, highly scalable applications that never go down and really cheap in the cloud? And usually you say, yeah. And so depending on what person you're talking to from Microsoft, they will give you a different answer of what you should use to do that. When in fact, when you kind of dig beneath the surface a little bit, there's usually pretty good answers based on, what level of lock-in are you willing to deal with? Like how much do you want to be able to take your application that's running in the Azure cloud today, like move it to another cloud or move it to on-prem or start on-prem and move to Azure? Or what types of languages and frameworks are you familiar with? Are you using Visual Studio with .NET? Or are you using Java and Eclipse? What level of control do you need to have over the infrastructure? Those are the types of questions that are sort of the second order questions beyond the just like, do you want to have a highly scalable web application? That typically lead to the right answer. So I'm interested in having conversations as much as possible about what types of applications people are building, how the various services kind of map to those applications, and effectively use you as guinea pigs in some cases to test out various things of like, hey, this is how we think this platform makes sense relative to this other platform, and see if those things resonate. So I've got some slides. I've got some demos that I can try to do for certain things. If people have been going to a bunch of the sessions that are associated with the products that we're going to talk about, those demos are going to be way better, or at least more in depth than the ones that I'm going to do here. So if you're expecting super sexy demos of each product, it's probably not the right session for you. So does that kind of make sense? Does that sound like something? Nobody's walked out yet. So. People are still waiting for the beer. We do have an hour and 15 minutes. I mean, is there an LCGO somewhere in your plan? Never mind. Okay, so a little bit of marketing spiel here. I mean, seriously, why are people answering that question, with a strong yes when you ask about building these highly scalable, highly reliable cloud applications? It's because probably a number of you work for traditional enterprises who are quite worried about having their lunch eaten by some upstart software company that's able to take advantage of the hugely elastic cloud, build an application, have that spin up and be really reliable, highly scalable, and run straight past your slow legacy enterprise. And so there's a lot of this kind of stuff in the market about software's eating the world and every company needs to become a software company, and all that stuff kind of makes sense. And one of the ways that you get to that level of productivity and being able to build those applications really quickly, those highly scalable, reliable applications, we think is to standard software engineering kind of thing, move higher up the levels of abstraction, right? So where we were in the old days, and I'm sure many people in this room are probably still in this world, if you've got an on-prem data center where you're running your software, it's all up to you, right? Dealing with everything down from the base networking and storage and compute components all the way up to the application layer. And that's how you end up with a large IT organization that manages all of those red boxes. So when we started the cloud, we said, okay, let's start getting rid of some of those red boxes, and at least get you up to the level that we're taking care of like the base infrastructure, right? So you can get some VMs set up, you can get some storage and networking, and get some of those base components. But we're going to draw the line there between, just below the OS. So the OS is still up to you to manage. You can decide how you want to configure it, what software you want to install on it, and so on. Beyond that, we go to PaaS, which I will set a disclaimer is like the most ambiguous term ever, and we can talk about why that is in a second. But we have to color in some boxes, so we color in the boxes that say basically what's up to you in a PaaS platform is the application piece and the data. So you're getting out of the business, for the most part, and this is where we get into the ambiguity of it, you're getting out of the business of managing some of those middle components, some of the OS pieces and middleware and runtime pieces in certain cases. The app service team likes to use this analogy. I don't know if anybody went to the app services talk, but if they did, they probably saw this slide already. Of IaaS being you're owning and operating your car, which gives you lots of control, but also lots of responsibility. Right? You got to pay insurance on it, you got to figure out where to park it, all that kind of stuff. Move up to PaaS, you can now rent a car. So you're still in control of the car, but you're not having to deal with all the complexities of ownership. And then you can move all the way up to SaaS, if you think about something like Office 365, where you're not writing the application, you're just using the application that's served in the cloud. And so really where we are in kind of the evolution of the platform is that PaaS is kind of on the ascendancy, we think. Now, it's interesting because Azure thought PaaS was on the ascendancy in like 2008, and we were a little bit early. For people that have been around for a while and watching the Azure story, we started out with something called cloud services, so web and worker roles, which are effectively a PaaS style platform where you weren't necessarily dealing with the details of managing the OS. You were mostly focused on your application, automatically scaled up and patched and all that greatness. And what customers told us was, slow down there, buddy. We've still got all these on-prem data centers that we want to just get into your cloud so that we can turn off the lights in those data centers. We're not quite ready to like rewrite our whole application to target a new model, right? That's a whole different kettle of fish. So if you could just provide me some infrastructure that I can run my existing topology on top of, that'd be swell. So that's where we kind of backed up the bus a little bit, and backed up the car for this analogy, and released IaaS. And that's been super successful for those types of lift and shift operations from on-prem data centers. So here's kind of the pieces that we're going to focus on today. And like I said, what I'm going to do is kind of just breeze through sort of how we think about these different offerings, and get towards the end where we'll talk. I've got some thoughts on how we position these things, and that's where I'd love to just kind of open up the conversation as much as possible. So we'll start at kind of the top of the stack. And the first piece of guidance that I'll give people, or suggestion that I'll give people when we're thinking about all the options that are available in Azure. And in fact, I was just having this conversation with somebody at the end of my last session. Is standard kind of software engineering thing. To me, the highest level of abstraction that you can target that doesn't limit you in a way that is painful for you is usually going to make you the most productive, right? So I typically recommend people start at the highest level of the stack possible, look at the limitations that implies, and decide, are those limitations things that I can deal with or not? Because if you do the opposite way, then you end up with all this power, but it may not be power that you actually care about. And it usually comes with a lot of complexity, or at least a lot more complexity. So app service we think of as being kind of the top of the application stack, in the sense that it's focused on a couple of specific but very, very common and popular types of applications, verticals, which is really around building web applications, either websites or web API applications, or mobile backend services. So you've got a mobile application or a desktop client application that users are interacting with, entering data. You need to have some cloud piece that's acting as the backing for that. App service is a great solution for that type of scenario. Now, the downside of that is you don't get control of the machines that the app service is running on. So I build a website or I build a mobile app backend, I give it to app service to run, and it just runs it, and it can scale it as necessary. But basically, if you needed to go into those machines and install some very specific piece of software, or go in and muck with a registry key or something like that, you can't do it. You don't have access to those machines. So it is that really top level platform abstraction, or what some people refer to as a true PaaS, where we get into kind of these terms being not necessarily super useful. It is that kind of top level abstraction that can make you really, really productive. A lot of great tooling in Visual Studio, really focused on those types of scenarios. Let's see what's interesting on this slide. Yeah, so another thing in terms of constraints, you've got a specific set of languages that you can target, right? It's fairly popular languages, particularly for things like building web applications. But if you want to write an application in, I don't think they've got COBOL up there, right? If you want to write a COBOL application, a mobile backend in COBOL, you are out of luck with Azure App Service. So Ruby, I thought they had. It's interesting that it's not up there. That's probably one of their top ones to go add. So at some level you do have a constraint in that sense. In terms of what those solutions might look like, you got the app service in the middle there. You might have clients that are coming in through a browser, going through a service that we call Traffic Manager, whose job is basically to route traffic based on if you've got applications or instances of the application that are deployed out to multiple regions, send you to the one that is closest. You can easily set up continuous integration, continuous delivery through any number of tools, set up app insights. Because this is kind of a fairly common pattern, and because app service is really targeting this type of application and not having to, or focusing in on this particular type of solution, they're able to make these integrations work splendidly well, right? So again, if that type of app is what you're trying to build, you will find that these guardrails make you super productive because you're not having, you don't have 70 different options for each of these things because you don't need them. Like the options that you have are really the ones that you want. So I can do a very quick demo. How many people are familiar with Tri-App Service? A few? Okay, so let me just show you that because my intent is not really to show you a detailed demo of app service, but to point you to a place where you can go and play around with it for yourself. So this is a really cool service that the app service team has built, which is called Tri-App Service, where I can go in and create an initial app service really quickly, and key point, for free. You don't have to even provide a credit card. This is not part of the Azure trial $200 credit or whatever we give you these days. This is, I can go in, create an app service, create a website, play around with the experience for free, for a limited time, of course, but just kind of get a sense of what it looks like. So I can create a website, base it off of any number of these templates. If you choose ASP.NET Core, I think because I've already done this, it's just assuming that I'm going to use my Microsoft account. But typically at this stage, you would get a pop-up that asks you to log in with either Microsoft account, Facebook, or Google, are the three options that they provide. That's just as a sort of fraud limiting mechanism. I'm not going to send you spam or post to your wall or whatever. But just like that, we've got a app service that's been created that I can go take a look at. So there's the actual site. Pretty fantastic, I think. I can go in here and use a tool called Monaco to actually edit the source code for that website directly in the browser, which is pretty sweet. Let's see. Let's go into views. That's just going to auto save, and if I go back over, go here, refresh this, there's my change. So super fast. Like I've got a website up and running in like seconds. I can make edits into the browser. I can then, if I go back here, I can very quickly connect it up with Git. I can create a source control repo. I can get it connected up to Visual Studio. And you get set up with a 1 hour sort of sandbox to play around with. You can extend that out, but we start to ask for a little bit more information. But even within an hour, you can kind of get a sense of what the experience looks like and whether that's an appropriate tool for you. So I definitely recommend that people give this a shot.